All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is, let's see the temperature outside, right? It is a breezy, 85 degrees here in Austin, Texas, especially here on the hilltop. My name is Josh Hankin. Welcome back to another installment of All Access Garage. Today's a kind of a different episode, right? Usually we have, musicians come in, but I had someone who I've known for about a year and who's been, with me uh, alongside my career in the biology, I guess what the sciences, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Without further ado, Mickey Parker, how's it going?
Good. How about you, man? Thanks
It's
for
good.
having me.
Of course, yeah. Like I mentioned, this is the first time we are doing anything that's not related to music. But I feel like it's important because the world doesn't only revolve around music, right? There's a
It
lot of
helps
other
though.
stuff. So, yeah, like I said, thanks for joining us today. I think it's going to be a fun episode with you. Yeah, shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. So I guess from the top, right? Who is Mickey Parker?
Well, I am a PhD candidate at Texas A&M University in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology program. Hopefully, it's my last year. I don't think I want to do any more than a year. um, yeah, so I'm a herpetologist. That means I study reptiles and amphibians. So that's what I'm doing my doctoral work on. That's a career I've had since 2008. Um, yeah, I grew up in Gary, Indiana, so about 45 minutes outside of Chicago, and did my undergrad degree at Purdue University, actually in animal science. And then once I got done with that, I moved to Tucson, Arizona, and I worked as a wildlife biologist, studying reptiles and amphibians all over the desert Southwest. And then in 2016, I came over to Texas to do my PhD here at A&M. And I've taught a couple classes at St. Ed's.
Right. So how does it feel? I mean, now that you've taught at St. Ed's and kind of the Austin thing, does that little bit of a rivalry within the Aggies and Longhorns? Do you ever feel it when you're here?
Man, I stay out of that stuff. I stay out of that.
You're like, no comment on that one, right?
None, none.
So, kind of growing up for you, why did you want to be in the sciences, specifically herpetology?
Yeah, so I think three separate things. So I grew up, like I said, in Northwest Indiana, and that's on the South Shore of Lake Michigan. And there's this beautiful stretch of dunes called the Indiana Dunes. It just became a national park. I'm so happy that that area is a national park now. And my grandparents used to take me there. And, I was obsessed with just anything in nature, but especially reptiles, amphibians, and fish back then more so. There was a little nature center that had tanks of salamanders and fish, and I was just like transfixed on it. You couldn't like pry me away from those tanks. And the same thing at Brookfield and Lincoln Park zoos in Chicago, and the Shed Aquarium was just huge. They'd have to, if they took me there on a field trip or my family took me there, they'd have to pry me out of there. So it was just this fascination from the time I was a kid. And I mean, from the time I was in kindergarten, I said, I want to be a marine biologist and a herpetologist. And I
So,
mean, go ahead.
no, no, you go for it. Yeah, so that's all right,
Yeah,
but
and as far as herpetology in particular, um, because reptiles and amphibians are cool. I think that's a good enough reason to want to study something, at least at first. And, as you get further into science, you realize that reptiles and amphibians are really good study organisms to answer certain questions about ecology and conservation, which is what I do. But, when it comes right down to it, reptiles and amphibians are cool.
no, yeah. So like so do you have any like I know when we previously met, you've had some dogs. But do you have any like perhaps reptiles that you own as pets or anything like that sort?
Yeah, I've always had some. I got my first leopard gecko when I was 10 years old. She finally died when I was 29. So she traveled with me all over. Um, right now, I just have two snakes. I have a gopher snake and a Mexican black king snake. Um, I'm not super into keeping reptiles, but they're really nice to have around if I need to go do an educational presentation or something like that. My kid likes them.
And do they have names?
The gopher snake is Lenny, and the king snake is Mysterio after the Spider-Man villain.
Oh, right on, right on. So, overall, given that, your goal is with herpetology and whatnot, or rather, you're studying that, what is your overall goal? To what would you like to preferably like to accomplish in life with herpetology?
Yeah, so what I do, I conduct basic research with the goal of improving conservation outcomes for reptiles and amphibians. Specifically, I study conservation translocations. So let's say we have a population of lizards. I study lizards. And that population goes extinct. We can take lizards from other populations and reintroduce them to that area and try and reestablish populations. So those are some of the conservation outcomes I'm trying to impact with my research. And as far as kind of like an overall career goal, I want to do that within the realm of academia. I want to be a professor, but specifically at a more undergraduate serving institution, kind of like St. Ed's. I love teaching at St. Ed's. But I'm really passionate about undergraduate research and getting undergraduates involved in projects where they're actually doing science. So that's kind of my overall goal with my research and how I want to tackle it.
No, yeah, definitely. And I mean, as a student of you, I believe it's already been a year officially, and
Yeah,
I guess I know that I know the people who are listening don't really know, but I've been Mickey's research student for for now what I think today or somewhere this month it's about to be a year of doing
yeah. You
this.
started working on my project about a year ago.
So, and we'll talk a little bit about the project just in a bit, but you know, that short time that we've been there, I can tell you firsthand, Mickey loves teaching, and it's something that like a lot of professors don't really nowadays show that. And the little things, like I think one thing that that kind of always will stick with me, and I think a lot of students is we have this kind of this thing where Mickey, I think it was for lab, it was a dad joke of the week or something, and everyone, I'm telling you, everyone was so excited to want to like go to the class and learn because it was like it was such a welcoming environment to that. So I
Thank you.
think a lot of
I really
people were
appreciate that.
very, I think a lot of people can agree with me that you know you would make an amazing professors, and hopefully soon, you get that PhD and maybe return back to St. Ed's, right? Who knows? Who knows what the future will
Yeah,
hold for us?
that'd be
So,
pretty sweet.
but yeah. So then, kind of, you mentioned you're doing research. Can you go a little bit more into depth? I mean, of course, I know, but for the people who
Yeah,
don't know,
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so, like I said, my research focuses on these conservation translocations. So, moving animals trying to reestablish populations where they've been extirpated, where they've gone locally extinct. So, my dissertation research has three parts. And one was an on-the-ground translocation of dune sagebrush lizards in West Texas. The dune sagebrush lizard is this highly specialized lizard that only lives in this crescent of sand dunes that stretches from southeastern New Mexico into West Texas. This thing's so specialized, they won't even cross a dirt road. They are just built to live in these sand dunes, and these sand dunes have formed over thousands of years by the interaction between or among sand, a little plant called shinnery oak. It's like an oak tree, but it gets about shin high, and wind. So you have these dunes that are partially stabilized by this oak tree. And then in between the dunes, you have these blowouts, areas of bare sand. And that's where the dune sagebrush lizard makes its living, in between that blowout shinnery oak interface. And like I said, they're highly specialized. They rely on these blowouts. But their entire range overlies the Permian Basin. So it's the largest oil and gas producing region in the country. So you can imagine the habitat's really fragmented from roads going to oil wells, oil well pads. And now the new threat out there is sand mining. They actually use sand for fracking. So they actually just like level sand dunes. So you can imagine there have been these local extinctions. So I did a translocation into an area where dune sagebrush lizards have gone locally extinct. I put lizards back, actually saw some reproduction, saw hatchlings growing to adulthood, but it just wasn't enough. By the end of my study, the population didn't take. But we learned quite a few lessons about monitoring the population, conditions needed for reproduction. So it wasn't a total failure. So the rest of my dissertation research focuses on how we can improve outcomes of translocations, how we can make them more successful to conserve biodiversity. And the project that Josh is helping me with studies how life history traits, so sets of co-evolved traits that influence an animal's reproductive success and their survival, how those can influence translocation success. So he's helping me do what's called a meta-analysis, where we're looking at the literature, analyzing a bunch of studies, and see what those studies who have had translocation success, what do they have in common as far as the life history of the animals involved. And then I'm also looking at the interactions between this specialist dune sagebrush lizard and a generalist, like this lizard's, as picky and specialized as the dune sagebrush lizard is. The side blotched lizard is the opposite. They don't care. Like they'll sit on top of like an oil well pad that's bare and bask in the sun. They don't care. So you can imagine, like, as that generalist, an animal that's kind of good everywhere faces off against a specialist that's really good in one spot but terrible everywhere else. As the landscape changes, and that dune landscape isn't that same dune landscape that the sagebrush lizard specialized in, how do those interactions affect, how do the populations of that generalist impact populations of the specialist? So, and how can we apply that to translocations?
No, and we go, especially with the things I'm working in, helping in this project. It's more that it goes, we go, what you require and what you're looking for is so into detail with a lot of stuff, and I think that's what makes it very interesting. Is because I feel like this is of something very personal to you for some reason. It's something that means something to you, and all these things that you're asking for the research and whatnot. Again, this is a year so far. You started it way before I did, and this is a year into this, and it's still ongoing. But it's like it's not. I don't think it'll ever stop. Would you agree? Kind of like this whole research thing, what we're doing.
Eventually, like the data you're helping me collect,
Yeah.
those are going to go into an analysis, and I'm going to publish that as a manuscript. But so that one question, we're gonna have a paper out of that, that's published in a journal. So that part of it's going to be over. But as far as my research trajectory throughout the rest of my career, I'm going to still be asking questions very similar to that. And hopefully, once we do this analysis, we'll have, I say hopefully, we most likely will have more questions that come out of it, because that's science, right?
Yeah.
So even though that this one part is going to end, it may seem like it's not, but I promise you it will. Once that ends, there will be more questions to build off. Science is this iterative process. It just keeps building off of previous work. And as far as being personal to me, I mean, yeah, I care about doing good work. And as far as data collection goes, the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So, when you see me being very particular about the data you're collecting, it's because the quality of the data we collect now is going to impact the quality of the analysis and the results, which is then going to in turn affect how those results are interpreted.
No, and exactly. So I think for people who aren't kind of like in the sciences, who don't know much about it, it's very, to Mickey's point, it's very there's once you answer a question, it opens a door to like more, like two questions, and then those two questions to another four. So it's not that it's not that we're learning basically about what's going on, and the journals that I've, especially when I'm researching, they go into like this whole detail and everything, and I think it's important to kind of understand what you're talking about and kind of just giving information out, because again, it's like Mickey said, he's very particular on what he wants. I already know where to go and what to find, because it's like, you can't just say like, I don't know. I can't just tell you this information's real. You're like, well, where did you get that information? Is that information, you're building up on that, and it's very, I guess where I'm trying to get to is more that it's important where this information is getting from and how we distribute that. I guess, if that makes sense. So
Yeah, and you and I have had lots of discussions on what a good, reliable source is,
Yeah.
right? Some of the stuff out there, it's not going to be reliable enough to be used in a scientific analysis.
And I think one thing that's kind of interesting, which at first I was like, what? But then it made sense, was one of those websites that are asking about like how to take care of your pet lizard or something like that, right? You're just like, at first I'm like, well, maybe this is real. Obviously these people are doing it right. But then you realize you're like, no, these people aren't scientists. They're just taking care of pets. That's all they're doing. So it
And
makes sense.
yeah, and hobbyists out there taking care of reptiles, they're incredibly smart people and they know what they're doing. But that particular instance, we were looking at lifespan, which is an important life history trait. And the lifespan of a captive animal is always going to be longer than one in the wild. Like my pet leopard gecko when I was a kid that lived to be 19 years old probably doesn't happen in the wild very often, because they're predators. When we keep and we take them to the vet. In the wild, no, if an animal gets sick, nobody's taking that to the vet. So animals in the wild don't last quite as long. So it's all about finding also credible sources and sources that will apply to the question we're trying to ask.
Of course, yeah, and I think that's something that you also bring up a good point too there. And I know we're kind of talking about this, but it's interesting because it's like especially like the stuff on the research. You're specifically asking me to do stuff animals that are from the wild, not just captive. Because if you're just solely having captive animals, you're not really getting a set data, or you are, but not reliable or accurate, rather.
Yeah, it could be
So
misleading.
exactly. So I think that's a good take on that too. I at first, again, when I first kind of digested this information, I'm like, what does this mean? But then after a while, the gears start turning. You realize like, oh man, like this is why it's important to have this going. So, but yeah, so then kind of with the whole herpetology going on, how has it personally impacted your life, perhaps?
Oh man, it's I can't imagine life without it at this point. It's taken me to so many places, introduced me to so many people. And I mean, when you do science as a career, it just shapes how you think. Um, and it shapes your enthusiasm for the natural world and it keeps you curious. There's always more questions to ask. Um, like I said, it's taken me places that I never thought I would go, um, and the people I've met, I wouldn't have met students at St. Edward's. I wouldn't have met, even though I didn't teach herpetology at St. Edward's, getting into herpetology is what put me on this career path. My life today has been shaped by it.
No, of course, yeah, and just kind of do you see life perhaps differently? Perhaps you see it as like communities, for example, and not just a group of people. Like I guess much more like, for example, for me, right, kind of working as an EMT prior. When someone's like, "Oh, I have a scratchy leg," my brain certainly is like, "Okay, what can this be?" You kind of going into like all this detail. Do you
Mhm.
perhaps, with herpetology, does that also give you like when you look at the ecology outside, like the ecosystem, does it kind of like say, does your brain just kind of go ahead and start doing science stuff, if that makes any sense with that?
I mean, kind of. You kind of see the interconnectedness of everything. I study populations of reptiles and amphibians. I study communities, so multiple species of reptiles and amphibians existing together. Um, so nothing exists in a vacuum. In like I was talking about with my research, we have these specialist species, but they can be impacted by these generalist species. So you tend not to view things, in a vacuum. You tend to view it more as a whole, more as an ecosystem, than like at the individual level.
No, so yeah, and I think that's very interesting. Because I mean, again, with me, it's um personally for me, I've had that unfortunate pleasure of knowing the whole medical stuff. So when I have like a headache, it's more that I'm thinking, okay, what can this mean? Did I do something? Did I like I start coming up with all this stuff, and it's like with all that information that's being given, sometimes, I when I'm out at like say zoos or just out there, you're like that animal up there, like for example, like the birds, like one of our, I don't know, I've had this professor, I have him right now. His name is Dr. William Quinn, and he goes and he's all like, he just sees a bird just randomly fly by. Guys, that's a vulture up there. Just starts, pointing at it, and he starts saying he starts talking about what they do and why they do it, even though it has nothing to do with the subject we're learning about
Yeah.
at the time. But it's like that's what I mean, though. It's like I guess the sciences open up a lot more questions and a lot more doors for you, which is very fun.
Yeah, like even I was teaching at St. Ed's human physiology of all things. Um, and I enjoy that. I think it's super interesting. But as soon as I start teaching it, I start thinking of like, oh, well, this would be cool to talk about from my area study. I'd bring up an example from herpetology that would apply to the situation, like talking about fast twitch and slow twitch muscles. And so I wanted to tell the class about rattlesnake tail shaker muscles, one of the fastest muscle twitches in the vertebrate world. So when you're a scientist, you start, you have all this knowledge and you want more, and you kind of see how it applies to different fields, and you realize maybe those fields aren't as different as they seem.
And do you ever do you again? I guess kind of going back to what I was mentioning. Do you kind of see the knowledge of science also to be a curse, if that makes any sense? Kind of like with me to an extent where it's like again, I start like for example, if I have like a headache or suddenly I have like arm pain, it's not doesn't necessarily mean it's dangerous. It just it happens. You know does that ever happen at times with you when you're researching or doing anything of that sorts?
Nah, it's not that serious with herpetology. I mean, my son, if my son's like watching a cartoon or something and they have like a cartoon crocodile or something, I'll be like, no, that's an alligator. Come on, they drew that wrong. That's about as serious as it
You start
gets.
shaking your fist in the air. You know, it's like I'm gonna come for you,
uh,
Cartoon Network and everything.
yeah, or like they'll draw a cobra with a rattle at the end of its tail. I'm like, they're not even in the same family. Come on.
So, kind of going back to what you were mentioning, how, the sciences have taken you everywhere for a while now. What type of, what, rather, where has the studies taken you? You mentioned that you've been all around the US, kind of here and there, but specifically, where has herpetology taken you?
Yeah, so I moved out to Tucson, Arizona. So I when I finished up at Purdue, I was trying to find grad schools. I didn't exactly know how to do that. So I was literally just like dialing up professors on the phone and trying to talk to them, sending cold emails, which I recommend you do still. Um, and I had one guy at University of Arizona. He's like, well, I haven't finished my PhD yet, so I can't be your graduate advisor. I don't have any money, so I can't pay you. But I study rattlesnakes, and if you'd like to come volunteer on my projects, that'd be great. So I loaded up my truck and a trailer, and I drove all the way to Arizona and started a brand new life just to volunteer on this rattlesnake project. I was working at as a manager at a pet store, and they like transferred me. Um, so I ended up in Arizona and just fell in love with the Sonoran Desert. And that job took me all over Arizona, New Mexico, California, northern Mexico. I ended up getting a consulting job, like working in Vegas and in the desert north of Vegas. Um, so kind of all over, presented at conferences, all over the US, up in Canada. Um, so it's been a ticket for me to see, lots of places.
And it's good because I mean now look at this, right? We're having a conversation. I feel like in a sense it's kind of the same idea. What you did with your research professor then, and how it's kind of not here. You're giving me that opportunity to grow as well. So who knows? Maybe I'll do something just as great as you. So there's always that. I like I said, I always
I don't
try to
doubt it.
look up. I always try to look up to the people who helped me. Because I think that it's important to give kind of that homage to the people who've supported you, and a lot of people don't have that privilege to.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm again. I think when I started with you, I was like, I need to research, but I don't know how to do that. I remember I emailed you and I'm like, I need to find research, and you're like, yeah, come talk to me. We'll set up a Zoom meeting, and we set it up, and you were just talking to me all these professors' research, and then you go ahead and you're like, well, I'm also doing research too. If you want to do that, and I'm like, really? And you're like, yeah. I mean, all this stuff, and you're like, you can do it if you want to. It's up to you. And I'm like, me being the kid, I'm like, you know what? Screw it, I'll do it. And I did it. And I mean, I don't regret one thing doing it. Now in this project, we have like what 2008 to like 2021, and it's so much work into it. But I'm proud of that work that I've put into it, because it goes to show that like anyone is capable of doing anything if you put your mind to it. And I think it's a privilege on my end to even be a part of this. And again, kind of the idea of now going on 1 year, it's pretty amazing. I don't think, if you told me this, I know that kind of sounds silly, but if you told me this about a couple years ago, that I'd be in this research for almost a year, and now suddenly interviewing you on on this, I don't think I would ever believe you. But it's interesting how places take you everywhere, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's very
Sometimes you
cool.
just gotta step out of your comfort zone and go do something.
Exactly, and I think that's something that I did. I think
Yeah,
I
and you've
was
done
kind
a
of,
great job.
and I think with, and I hate kind of to bring it to me, but it's like, I think to anyone who needs to hear it, it's important to kind of put yourself out there. Like you mentioned, get out of your comfort zone. Some life isn't about always being comforted. It's more of taking advantage of those opportunities. Sometimes they'll be uncomfortable, sometimes they won't, and you just got to tackle it head on. And sometimes it's rewarding, and look where I'm at now, right? I have like 1 more year here, and hopefully that's med school there right afterwards, but or
There you
grad
go.
school, depending on all how that works. Um but it's
Or you
worked
might
out.
become a weirdo herpetologist.
Maybe, right? Maybe the whole idea of med school, and then me just studying lizards, right? Who knows? I think it's an interesting thing for sure. But
Mhm.
is there any kind of like interesting stories you'd like to mention with anyone? Either whether it be from like, being, I don't know, at A&M, or specifically herpetology, anything fun, anything interesting, something like that?
No, there's plenty of stories from the field, that's for sure. Um, let's see. So when I first moved to Arizona, I moved there to volunteer at the end of 2007. And they take me out to this site, and they're doing construction. We're studying, it's the housing development and golf course, and we're studying the effects of that on rattlesnakes. Um, so we get out there, and I'm driving around in my truck on these dirt roads, and I'm just like taking everything in, and just mind blown, right? I'd never been, in a place like that. And all of a sudden I see a bobcat sitting on top of a cactus. You can see that picture behind me.
Hmm.
And he's just sitting up there. And I guess they had done some construction work and scared it, and it's like just sitting on top of this cactus. And I remember that just being like a mind blowing thing for me. Like, what is that thing? What is that bobcat doing up there? Um, so yeah, and then there was a time I got like attacked by bees in Mexico. Like walking along a slope, and I've got my snake tongs in my hand, and I'm looking for snakes under rocks, flipping, logs, all that stuff. And I've got a backpack on. All of a sudden I feel like a poke in my back. Oh, that's weird. It must be a thorn. And all of a sudden I hear this buzzing noise come out of the ground, and I just see this cloud of bees start chasing me. So I start like running down this slope, and I've got bees stinging me the entire time. I trip over like a tree root and just start tumbling down the slope. I lose my snake tongs. I make it down to the bottom of the creek finally. I'm like trying to catch my breath, and another bee comes and just nails me right in the temple. That was also my first year in the field.
So I'm pretty sure you've learned a lot more how to avoid bee attacks and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. I mean, that one I think I just got unlucky and stepped in the wrong place. But
Since I guess with snakes and everything, have you ever encountered snakes that are like, that just want, I wouldn't say necessarily want to hurt you, because obviously they're trying to defend themselves.
mhm.
But has there ever been a time where one almost have attacked you, or you've gotten an attack perhaps?
Well, snakes don't attack. Rattlesnakes can do a very, pretty intimidating defense posture, but snakes aren't aggressive. Um, they're defensive for sure. But you hear stories of like, well, that snake came after me. It didn't, I promise you. What happened is there's like a nice rock pile behind you, and it's trying to get to that to get away from you. I've spent much of my adult life looking for rattlesnakes. And the stories that people tell, like, oh, it chased me or it tried to attack me, it's never happened to me. So with any stories people tell about snakes, you can, take those with a grain of salt. Um, like I said, I've spent a lot of time in the field looking for them. So I've never had anything try and chase me or attack me.
Right on. And kind of, outside of herpetology, what other hobbies do you have, perhaps?
Too many. I really like to fish, especially out of a kayak.
Hmm.
I think that's like one of the most relaxing, fun things in the world. I actually make some of my own lures. I tie jigs to catch crappie. Um, Outside of fishing, I build cigar box guitars. So I take like a cigar box and make that the resonating body of the guitar. Um, so I have like a little Etsy store. It's called Parker Homemade Music. Grad school's kind of slowed that down a little bit. But if you can check out Parker Homemade Music on Facebook and see some of the work I've done in the past.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw it. They were really beautiful. I think that was super cool. I was looking
Thanks.
at it and I was like, that'd be just a cool piece just to have. You know what I mean? I think the idea of making something yourself like that is just so cool. Especially because
It's
it's really
satisfying.
unique. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing like building a guitar and then stringing it up for the first time and hearing it play. It's awesome.
Right on, right on. And I know that we talk a lot about music when we're not doing research. We're
Yeah, I'm a
talking
music
about,
nerd.
yeah. I think you were mentioning to me how you at a point did collect vinyls for a while. I know that the listeners, if they're reoccurring listeners, I know a lot of them know that I collect vinyls and I'm obsessed with that. And but you know it firsthand. You've seen a lot of my vinyls and the boxes I have,
Mm.
and I guess kind of going off of that, what are you have any favorite vinyls you have? Anything that, and I guess it's kind of leading to the next question, um, what music recommendations would you have, vinyls, anything like that, perhaps for our
Yeah,
listeners?
I don't collect records in the sense of like I have to get a mint condition, whatever. I like the experience of listening to music on vinyl. I'm a huge country music fan, so if I can get old country records from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then you've got this cool artwork and it's big and you hold it in your hands and it's more of an active listening experience. And I think that genre in particular lends itself to listening on vinyl. Partially because some of those albums you can only find on vinyl.
No, yeah.
But yeah, I buy them just like I would buy, any other form of music, it's not so much about the collecting for me as it is the experience.
And
Um,
maybe you can agree with me on a point, but if there's something about having physical music in your hands or something like that, and it
sure.
sounds a way much more better on personally to me than listening through it on your phone or anything like that. There's just a sense, I
Yeah.
don't know,
I
listening through
mean,
on my record player is just, it sounds so much better. I guess you can hear the intent of what they had inside the music a lot more clearer, if that makes sense.
yeah. And what was big for me growing up, when I was a teenager and, discovering punk rock, you'd go to the record store and you'd buy like a 3.99 sampler from Epitaph Records and it'd have 30 bands on it. And you'd sit there and you'd listen to those bands, and you'd go buy their CDs, and then you'd open the liner notes, see which bands they toured with, and then you'd go buy those bands CDs.
Oh wow! So it
Um,
was kind of like, it was kind of the only, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you learned about other bands was more of buying band CDs
yeah,
and learning about them on what they've toured with them, kind of
yeah,
idea.
you'd read the thank yous. Like that's the first thing you'd read is the thank yous, and you're like, oh, well, the Bouncing Souls, they toured with Anti-Flag. Okay, I got to go check out that. Um, so yeah, it's almost like doing a literature search for a scientific paper. It's like, okay, I found this paper and they cite this paper. I got to go back and get that. And that's how you discover those older bands. The ones who kind of started things.
I never thought of it like that. Really,
It's
I've
the
never.
exact same.
No, yeah, I never thought of that because I'm like, to an extent, what I do is I'm more like, again, like I worked South by. For people who don't know, I was working South by this past spring break, and it was much more that like the people were like, oh, we toured with so and so. You would learn, or for example, like you would just go and just listen to bands, and then you would figure out if you liked them or not. But I never thought of it kind of like in that perspective where it's almost like a literature where they're citing other people, and
Yeah.
it's like the band. Again, everyone knows this by now. I'm a huge fan of the Idols, and the band Gustav that was opening for them. I went to go see them here at South by, but it's interesting because it's like again it goes to the idea where it's like it's more of like the citations, if that makes sense. How you and it's interesting. I never thought of it that way. So now, thanks to you, I'm probably not gonna get that out of my head anytime soon. But yeah, so kind of still on that topic, what recommendations would you have for people who want to get to know who you are?
Like for music?
Yeah.
Yeah, like as far as new stuff goes, Gregor Barnett, he's in a Midwest punk band called the Menzingers. He just put out a solo album that's phenomenal. I was actually listening to that one this morning. There's a band called Woven Hand, and they just put out a new album this year, and that'll blow you away. It's hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
Woven Hand is led by a guy named David Eugene Edwards, and he was a seminal figure in the Denver Sound, which is kind of a scene of like gothic alt country.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he's still got this band Woven Hand that's just putting out amazing material. Yeah, and I said I was a big country fan, and I think I don't think anybody's out there doing it as good as Charlie Crockett
Oh
or
yeah, yeah.
Mike and the Moon Pies. I don't know that there's a better honky tonk band around right now than Mike and the Moon Pies. So, yeah, that's what I'm into right now. But yeah, I'm into a lot of things: country, punk, blues, ska, all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Again, we always talk about it. At least every week, we leave. I leave our meeting with a new band to listen to. So in a sense, I kind of also do, look forward to these meetings a lot because it's like, who is he going to talk about this week now, right? What band am I going to learn this week? And it's fun because it's like, I feel like it's more of like a present when you learn about a new band. You can't wait just to unravel every single thing about them, and then when
Mm.
you do, you're like, is that it? Like you want more and everything. So, I've learned a lot from that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, and to your point too, also about the finals, I know that with me, I kind of again, I like that idea. I say collecting, but usually when I get any, I think the only vinyl I have that I haven't opened was the Isles one. I don't know if I've showed you. It
Yeah.
was a collector's edition. I have it on my wall with stuff there, and I'm like, I'm not gonna open it. I was so tempted to the other day, when I was back home. I was like, I saw it there, and I'm like, I feel like just ripping this thing open and just putting it on the vinyl thing. But I was like, it's too pristine to go ahead and rip it open and have it, my record player. I wouldn't say necessarily destroy it, but eventually the needle will kind of dig into the
Yeah.
grooves, and so. But yeah, just kind of moving on just a bit, I guess it's a little bit more of a deep talk here. Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Whether it be still doing herpetology, what do you think you might be doing, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, my goal, if everything works out, I'd like to graduate from A&M by the end of this year, and I'm on the job market right now, looking for professor jobs at more undergraduate focused institutions, and hopefully I land one of those, and maybe 10 years from now have tenure, continuing this line of research about how we improve conservation translocation outcomes, how we make them more successful. And I want to do a lot of mentoring. I want 10 years from now, I want other ecologists to come out of my lab. I want people to be able to walk in my lab like I did back in 2007, not knowing a thing, and come out of it a bona fide scientist. If I can do that, I'll consider that a pretty successful career.
That's great. I think that's a very good point. Thing. Um, kind of like a good outlook. You know what I mean? You're. I guess what I'm feeling is you want to be an impact in someone's life as well, like
Sure,
the way
absolutely.
someone that person was to you back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, somebody gave me a chance, and didn't know
No, definitely,
anything
and
then.
I think it's happening here too right now. I think again, I keep bringing it up myself a lot, but it's like I think you've given me that chance where it's like I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have. Again, it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning is I never thought I was ever going to get land something like this, but here we are again a year later,
Mhm.
and it's working out. I mean, again, I when you first told me, oh, we're doing this translocation thing, and it's about all these different types of animals, I'm like, oh my god, I have to learn about animals. But it's like you're learning along the way as you're doing it, and I can tell you now that like I understand a lot more things about certain animals, and although perhaps it may not be as impactful for my future, going to the medical field, at least I know leaving this that I knew a lot more than what I did coming in, and that
Well,
perhaps maybe in somewhere in the future it'll help me somewhere down the line.
absolutely. I mean, being able to read literature and get the information that you need out of it, I mean, that's a critical skill, whether you're going to be a doctor, whether you're going to be a herpetologist, whether you're going to be an entomologist. Like biology writ large requires that you be able to find credible sources and get the information that you need from them. So these things apply.
Of course, definitely, and you know, um, I guess now, right? If you're looking back at everything you've done now, you've accomplished so much in life right now. You're about to finish and get your PhD. If you can look back at yourself, at your younger self from this point in time in life, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I think kind of the old saying, comparison is a thief of joy. Um, stop comparing, and I still struggle with this, to be honest with you. Um, stop comparing yourself to other people, what you've done versus what they've done. Do your own thing and enjoy it. Um, I think sometimes I got too wrapped up in what's the next thing, got to do the next thing, got to do the next thing. Um, because I was trying to be as good as everybody else, that, maybe I didn't quite savor the moment quite as much as I should have, and, gave myself a little bit more of a burden than I needed to carry, because I was always, oh man, am I going to grad school too late? Or, oh man, I didn't get as good a grades in undergrad as somebody else did. It kind of sucks the fun out of things sometimes. So,
And maybe you might agree with this, but I feel like it kind of leads to this saying, it's not a race, it's a marathon type of deal.
exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's everyone, and I think that's something I also do struggle because I see a lot of my friends graduating already. I see them already having jobs and everything, and I'm just like still an undergrad. But it's like I guess it kind of goes back to what you're mentioning is it's not you shouldn't be worrying about them. Worry about yourself and live in the moment.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like if someone had told me that when I was younger, I feel like I would have appreciated that. And I mean, I still now, like, I still kind of struggle with that, but I feel like it's something that a lot of people kind of also need to digest a bit because it's like, you see people like now, I have friends who are getting married already. I'm only 22 years old and they're already getting married, which, no,
Hmm.
all power to them. I'm not trying to, poop on them or anything like that, but it's more that it's like, I see that and I'm like, what am I doing with life? What am I going to do after this? It's like, I feel like something that maybe you again agree with that is more of live in the moment,
Yeah,
you know.
and have goals and plan for your future and everything, but enjoy the journey too. Don't forget about the journey
And
on your
yeah, and
way.
I think something too is more of that, you know, it's not always going to work out at times, but that's
No,
why but I think it's always important to keep trying. It doesn't hurt to keep trying and trying to succeed. You're only I think something that I've learned is also too is that failing doesn't necessarily mean you failed at life. It just means you're learning from that experience to kind of
you're
get back
100%
up.
right.
So it's an interesting thing, but yeah, I mean, it's important, and I think it kind of leads also to that thing of also taking care of your mental health. I think that's something that a lot of people need to do.
Oh yeah,
Um,
huge.
because it's always been that mentality, especially where I grew up. It's more of kind of like man up, grow some balls type of idea, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah, for sure.
yeah, and it's kind of like I wish I was told it's okay to have these things and everything. So have these emotions, feel like a person. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
but yeah, I want it's already almost an hour and everything doing this. So, and I'm almost out of questions. I don't know. Do you want to say anything? Any closing thoughts or statements, perhaps?
No, man, I really appreciate being here. This was really enjoyable, and yeah, it's good to talk about herpetology, music. You know, what else is there, right?
Yeah, right on. Well, like I said, thanks for joining it. And it's interesting because it's like again, this is the first time we're doing this show is doing anything not related to music, and it's interesting because it's like, I've always had that idea. It's like I want to be more than just. I have a platform here that I want to share with people, and even then, like for example, maybe someone who's struggling don't know what they want to do. Perhaps now, maybe they'll be inspired to do herpetology now, right? So it's just anything like that. Anything's possible if you put your mind to it. Long story short. So,
Absolutely.
like I said, thanks for joining us. It means a lot that um, you took the time out of your day just to come and chill out with us and have fun. Yeah, do you have anything you want to plug in? Do you want? I don't know. I usually say, but any social medias? Maybe your thing.
No, I don't do that too much. Yeah.
Your
I'm not,
Etsy
I'm
account.
not
What
very.
is it?
It's Parker Homemade Music, but
There you go.
yeah, I'm not big on self promotion.
Well, again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. I appreciate you.
Cool. Thanks,
All
Josh.
right, thanks.